Hello everybody, it's Konstantin here. In this short video, I'll give you an overview of the brand new node material editor available in V-Ray 7 Update 3 for SketchUp and Rhino. This new node-based editing environment is a great alternative to the existing asset editor, especially when having to create or edit complex shaders. So without further ado, let's jump right in. The node editor window can be opened from the V-Rays toolbar, the V-Ray menu, or even from the asset editor. I'll start it from the toolbar. On the left, you see this infinite canvas workspace with an asset properties panel on the right. Materials and textures can be created or added to the canvas, and their properties are changed in the properties panel. Let's now see how this is done. Right-clicking in the canvas opens a context menu, which I can use to create either a material or a texture. I'll start with a single generic material. Once created, the material can be repositioned anywhere on the graph, and if I want to change any of its properties, I can select it and use the properties panel. Let's say I want to change the color of this shader to blue and make it metallic. Editing the material here is similar to what you get in the asset editor, so you shouldn't have any issues getting used to the new workflow. The node editor can do a lot more than just listing materials, of course. It really shines when working with multiple nodes and establishing connections between them. Now I will create a checker texture, again using the context menu, and I will connect it to the diffuse slot of the material. The dots on the left of each item are called input slots. The one on the right is the output. Connections are always made by dragging an output of a node and dropping it in an input slot of another. The preview up here shows me what I've achieved, same as in the classical asset editor. Let me make this shader even more interesting now. I will create a grid map, and this time I will connect it to the bump slot. So I've successfully generated my first textured material using the node editor. But what if I want to edit another existing scene material? This is actually quite easy. Use the small icon that is labeled Pick Material from Viewport and click on any piece of geometry in SketchUp's viewport. Its shader will be added to the node graph as long as it's a very specific one. I'll sample the material of this wall on the right. If you want to import a Cosmos material directly into the graph, you can open Cosmos, find the shader you like, and just drag and drop it anywhere on the canvas. Using the node editor on its own without having to go back to the asset editor is fully possible. This means that you can create materials, you can load existing materials, apply them to objects and so on without having to open any additional windows. To apply the recently imported Cosmos material to the wall, I can simply select it in the graph. Right-click and choose Apply to Selection. The same can be done with this small icon in the toolbar on the left. Keep in mind that materials can be added and removed from the canvas without deleting them from the project. Sometimes you want to see multiple shaders, other times you might want to focus on one specific material and remove everything else to avoid distractions. To remove something from the graph, right-click on it and choose Remove. Now I will show you how to navigate in this new environment. You will also see what else is available in the menu and on this small toolbar in the lower left corner. The middle mouse button is used for panning. You basically have to click and drag with the middle mouse button to change the visible canvas area, while the scroll wheel is used for zooming. The minimap in the upper right corner of the canvas shows all the items in the graph and the currently visible area. The left mouse button can be used for navigating in the minimap itself, like so. Now let's take a look at what else is possible through the view menu. Zoom to fit all changes the visible area so that it encompasses all the nodes in the graph. Zoom to fit selection focuses the currently selected items. Both functions have default hotkeys assigned to them, which you should get used to, as those two actions are performed constantly. I can hit Z on the keyboard to zoom all the nodes, or F to focus on the ones selected. Next, you have the option to toggle the visibility of the minimap, something you can also do with a hotkey. By default, there's a grid visible on the canvas. You can easily enable the grid snapping or disable it and hide the grid if you don't intend to use it. The layout menu also lists some useful functions. Layout All organizes all the items currently on the canvas in a very neat way. Layout Children can do the same for the selected item and its child textures or materials. The hotkey L and Control L can be used instead of opening the menu every time. The Layout Children function is also on the toolbar over here for easier access. Clear the graph removes everything from the graph. Let's now take a look at the Note menu. It starts with two selection features, Select All and the extremely useful Select Children. The Select Children comes in handy when one wants to move a material and all its child textures together. See on the keyboard can be used as a shortcut. This feature is also on the Quick Actions toolbar. At first, the next two actions sound quite similar, remove and delete, but actually there is a big difference between them. Remove only removes the selected node from the canvas, while it remains in the project, it remains in the scene. You can always bring it back later. Deleting, on the other hand, removes things from the project completely, similar to the delete feature in the asset editor. Backspace on the keyboard performs removal, while delete key deletes. You might have noticed that some nodes, like the generic material, come with a big number of inputs. This makes the node quite big and sometimes hard to work with. This is where the node collapsing feature comes into play. This small arrow on the right can be used to hide the node's properties. Making new connections in this collapsed state is still possible. You will notice that when I drag an output over this item, its inputs list temporarily expands, helping me make the desired connection. Then the list collapses again. Both the expansion and collapsing can be applied to multiple items at once from the Node menu. We already used the pick and apply actions from the toolbar. They're also available in the menu. P and A keys can be used for working even faster. Now let's apply everything we've learned to a real-world example. I want to modify the concrete material on the ground to make it look wet with water puddles on the surface. I'll start by cleaning the graph and selecting the material I'll be working on. The concrete material I'll use here comes from Cosmos, and it uses two basic textures, one in the diffuse slot and another for bump mapping. To make this material appear wet, we can use a reference as a guide. In this photo here, you can clearly see that the wet areas of the concrete appear darker and have glossy or like slightly blurred reflections. The puddles themselves form an additional layer on top with bright and very sharp reflections. To achieve this effect, we'll first modify the diffuse portion of the material using procedural noise. Then we'll adjust the reflections using a version of the same texture and add a coating layer on top to represent the shiny water surface. Let me create a procedural noise map and blend it with the existing diffuse texture. To do this, I have two options. I can either connect the map to the color gain slot of the bitmap, or I can use a layered texture to blend the two. In this case, the multiply mode for the top layer gives me exactly the effect I need. I can now adjust the properties of the noise map to make the wetness appear more natural, let's say. You can, of course, utilize bitmap textures here to achieve very specific puddle shapes, but I prefer the procedural approach as it gives me greater flexibility. You can follow the progress I'm making in SketchUp's viewport, where I'm rendering with Chaos Vantage. The Vantage rendering in the viewport is another innovation in V-Ray 7.3 that I'll potentially cover in a separate video. Now I will enable the roughness control of the V-Ray material and connect the same noise map to the roughness slot. What's left now is to add the water puddles. For this, I'll take advantage of the coat layer in the generic material. However, the noise texture will need to be adjusted slightly to create nicely defined edges for the puddles. One of my favorite techniques is to remap grayscale values using a spline curve as an, let's say, intermediate map. The same can, of course, be done with a Bezier curve. Let me add a spline curve and connect it to the shader. The curve editor in V-Ray 7.3 has been significantly improved, making it much easier to create and reposition points. In this example, I only need a very simple adjustment. I'll invert the texture and apply a levels-like correction to significantly increase the contrast. The position of the points will determine the size of the puddles relative to the surrounding wet area. Note that this shader can be pushed even further, and the node editor makes it extremely easy to visually understand the material when you're making changes. Thanks to the single noise map source, I can now adjust the size of both the wet areas and the puddles to achieve exactly the configuration I'm after. Before I wrap up, there's one more thing I would like to cover, something that the node editor has inherited from the asset editor, the concept of local and global textures. Local textures are maps that exist within the context of a top-level material. They're created by adding textures through the texture slots in the material properties view. Notice that local textures are automatically deleted when they're disconnected. If you want to keep them in the project, you need to convert them to global textures before disconnecting from their parent material. Global textures, on the other hand, exist at the scene level. They can be connected to multiple materials at the same time because they do not have a single predefined parent. By default, textures created from the menu in the node graph are all global. I doubt that this distinction will directly affect your workflow, but it's good to keep it in mind. In the future, both texture types will be unified to eliminate any confusion caused by this separation. It is important to note that this is the first version of the node material editor for SketchUp and Rhino, and there are many improvements to come. I hope this video was informative and that it will help you get started using this powerful new tool. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.